The winter of 1943 settled over Warsaw like a shroud of ice and ash. The streets that once hummed with the laughter of children and the chatter of market vendors now echoed with the mechanical rhythm of German boots on cobblestone. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, thick with the smoke from chimneys that burned day and night, though not always with coal. In the heart of this occupied city, where fear had become as common as bread, and far more plentiful, a young woman named Helena Kowalska moved through the shadows with the careful grace of someone who understood that survival meant becoming invisible. Helena was 24 years old, though the war had aged her in ways that no mirror could fully capture. Her dark hair, once worn loose and shining down her back, was now pinned tightly beneath a worn headscarf. Her hands, which had once embroidered delicate flowers onto her mother's tablecloths, were now calloused and stained with dyes that never quite washed away. She worked in a textile factory on the eastern edge of the city, one of the few places where Polish workers were still permitted to earn their meager rations. But the factory was more than just a place of labor. It was a place of secrets. Every morning, Helena would wake in a cramped apartment she shared with 3 other women, all of them connected by threads of resistance that were never spoken aloud in daylight. The walls were thin, and the Gestapo had ears everywhere. She would dress in layers against the cold, wrapping herself in a coat that had belonged to her father before he disappeared in the first months of the occupation. The coat still smelled faintly of his tobacco, a ghost of comfort that she clung to on the darkest days. Then she would pick up her bag, a simple canvas satchel that appeared to contain nothing more than her lunch, a thermos of weak tea, and a small wooden box that looked like a sewing kit. The Germans who stopped her at checkpoints never looked twice at the sewing kit. Why would they? It was a possession of a working woman. Something so ordinary, so feminine, so utterly harmless that it barely registered in their minds. They would glance at her papers, sometimes make a crude joke that she would endure with downcast eyes, and then wave her through. They never opened the wooden box. They never noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched it to her chest. They never suspected that inside that innocent container, nestled among spools of thread and packets of needles, were components that could bring their entire operation to its knees. Helena had not always been a saboteur. Before the war, she had been a university student, studying literature and dreaming of becoming a teacher. She had been in love with a boy named Tomasz, who wrote her poetry and promised her a future filled with books and children and Sunday dinners with their families. But Tomasz had been shot in the street during the first week of occupation, killed for the crime of refusing to step off the sidewalk when a German officer approached. Helena had watched from her window as his body lay in the street for hours, a warning to anyone who might think of resistance. Something inside her had broken that day, or perhaps it had crystallized into something harder, sharper, more dangerous than she had ever imagined she could become. The resistance found her, as it found so many others who had lost everything. A whisper in the factory, a note slipped into her coat pocket, a meeting in a basement that smelled of mildew and desperation. They told her they needed people who could move through the city without suspicion, people who could carry things that needed to be carried. They told her the risks. They told her that if she was caught, there would be no trial, no mercy, only a bullet or a noose or something worse. She had agreed, without hesitation. What did she have left to lose? Now, 6 months into her work with the resistance, Helena had become someone she barely recognized. The frightened girl who watched her lover die had been replaced by a woman who could lie to a German soldier's face without flinching, who could assemble a timing device with steady hands, who could walk through the city carrying enough explosive material to level a building and appear as calm as if she were carrying groceries. But the fear never left. It lived in her chest like a second heartbeat, constant and exhausting. Every checkpoint was a test. Every suspicious glance was a potential death sentence. And yet she continued, because the alternative, doing nothing except in the occupation, becoming complicit through silence, was a death of a different kind. If you ever felt like the world underestimated you, like your quiet strength was mistaken for weakness, then you understand what Helena carried with her every single day. And if you want to see how one woman's courage changed the course of history in ways no one expected, then stay with this story. Subscribe now, because what happens next will show you that the most dangerous weapons aren't always the ones that make the loudest noise. The target had been identified 3 weeks earlier. A building in the Smuggle district that had once housed a Polish insurance company now served as a regional headquarters for the Gestapo's administrative operations. It wasn't the most heavily guarded facility in Warsaw. Those were fortresses, impossible to penetrate. But it was significant. Intelligence reports indicated that the building contained records of resistance members, lists of safe houses, documents that could unravel months of careful work and lead to the deaths of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people. The decision had been made at the highest levels of the resistance. The building had to be destroyed, and it had to be done in a way that would send a message. Helena had been chosen for the operation because of her record. In 6 months, she had completed 17 successful deliveries without a single close call. She was careful, methodical, and most importantly, she looked exactly like what she pretended to be, a tired factory worker just trying to survive. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Over the course of 2 weeks, Helena would make multiple trips past the building, each time carrying small amounts of explosive material disguised within her sewing kit. The components would be delivered to a safe house nearby, where they would be assembled into a device powerful enough to collapse the building's central support structure. Then, on the designated night, a team would plant the device and detonate when the building was empty, minimizing casualties but maximizing the destruction of Nazi records. But plans, Helena had learned, were fragile things. They depended on 1,000 variables aligning perfectly. And in occupied Warsaw, perfection was a luxury no one could afford. The first delivery went smoothly. Helena walked her usual route to the factory, detouring slightly to pass by the Gestapo building. She noted the guards, their positions, their routines. 2 at the front entrance, 1 at the side door, periodic patrols around the perimeter. She continued to the safe house, a narrow apartment above a bakery that had been closed for months. The baker, an old man named Pan Wojcik, was part of the network. He led her into the back entrance, said nothing, and returned to his post by the window, watching the street. Helena left the first package, a small bundle wrapped in cloth that looked like fabric scraps, in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Then she left, returning to her factory shift as if nothing had happened. The second delivery was more complicated. A new checkpoint had been established 2 blocks from her usual route, manned by soldiers she didn't recognize. Helena had learned to read the Germans, to distinguish between the career soldiers who were just doing their jobs and the true believers who saw every Polish face as a potential enemy. These soldiers were young, nervous, trigger-happy. She considered turning back, finding another route, but that would draw attention. Deviation from routine was suspicious, so she walked forward, her heart hammering against her ribs, the sewing kit clutched in her cold hands. They stopped her. Of course they did. One of them, barely older than 20 with acne still visible on his pale cheeks, demanded her papers. She handed them over, keeping her eyes down, her posture submissive. He studied the documents with exaggerated care, as if he could actually read Polish. His companion, slightly older and meaner looking, circled around her, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "What's in the bag?" The older one asked in broken Polish. "Lunch," Helena replied, her voice steady. "Am I sewing things?" "Show me." This was the moment. This was where everything could end. Helena opened the bag slowly, pulling out the thermos first, then the small package wrapped in wax paper that contained a piece of black bread and a withered apple. Then she reached for the wooden sewing kit, lifting it carefully, and opened the lid. The soldier leaned in, his breath reeking of schnapps and cigarettes. Inside the box, arranged with meticulous care, were spools of thread in various colors, a pincushion bristling with needles, a small pair of scissors, packets of buttons, and beneath it all, hidden in a false bottom that was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, enough plastic explosive to blow both of them into fragments. He poked at the thread with one dirty finger, then laughed. "You Polish women and your sewing," he said in German to his companion, as if pretty stitches will save them. They laughed together, and Helena laughed too, a soft, self-deprecating sound that made her want to vomit. The older soldier waved her through, already losing interest. She walked away with measured steps, not too fast, not too slow, and didn't allow herself to breathe fully until she had turned the corner and the checkpoint was out of sight. Then she ducked into an alley and leaned against the cold brick wall, her entire body shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. She had been seconds away from discovery, from torture, from death, and they had laughed at her sewing kit. Good, she thought, her jaw clenching. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate us. It will make their surprise all the sweeter. Over the next 10 days, Helena made 4 more deliveries. Each one was a test of nerve, a dance with death that left her exhausted and hollow. She began to have nightmares, dreams where the false bottom of her sewing kit fell open at a checkpoint, where German hands closed around her throat, where she heard the screams of her comrades being tortured in Pauillac prison. She lost weight, her already thin frame becoming gaunt. The other women in her apartment noticed, but said nothing. They all carried their own secrets, their own fears. In occupied Warsaw, you learn not to ask questions. The assembly of the device was completed on a Tuesday night. Helena was present, along with 3 other members of the cell. Marek, a former engineer who had designed the bomb. Zofia, a nurse who had access to medical supplies that could be repurposed for resistance work. And Pyotr, a teenager who served as a courier and lookout. They worked by candlelight in the basement of the safe house, their shadows dancing on the damp walls. Marek's hands moved with practiced precision, connecting wires, setting the timer, testing each connection. The device was crude by professional standards, but it would be effective, more than effective, when it detonated. The explosion would be powerful enough to collapse the entire central section of the building. 48 hours, Marek said quietly, sitting back on his heels. We plan it Thursday night. Set the timer for Friday at 3 a.m. The building should be empty, except for maybe a night guard or 2. And if it's not empty, Zofia asked. Marek's expression hardened. Then they die. They're Gestapo. They've killed enough of us. Helena said nothing, but she felt the weight of it settle over her. She had carried the components, had made this destruction possible. Whatever happened, whoever died, she would carry that responsibility. But she thought of Tomasz lying in the street, of the list of names in that building, of all the people who would die if those lists fell into the wrong hands. Sometimes there were no good choices. Sometimes there was only the choice between terrible and more terrible. The plan was to plant the device on Thursday night, but on Wednesday afternoon, everything changed. Helena was at the factory, working her shift at one of the massive looms, when Pyotr appeared at the door. He shouldn't have been there. His presence was a violation of protocol, a risk that could expose them all. She saw the panic in his eyes and knew immediately that something had gone catastrophically wrong. She waited until the shift supervisor was distracted, then slipped away to the washroom. Pyotr followed, his face pale and sweating despite the cold. They arrested Marek, he whispered urgently. This morning, someone informed. They took him to Pauillac. Helena's blood turned to ice. Marek knew everything. The location of the safe house, the names of everyone in the cell, the details of the operation. If he talked, when he talked, because everyone talked eventually under Gestapo interrogation, they were all dead. We have to run, Pyotr said. We have to disappear right now. But Helena was thinking, her mind racing through possibilities. The device, is it still in the safe house? Yes, but... Then we finish it. Tonight, we can't wait until Thursday. Pyotr stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Are you insane? They'll be watching the safe house. They'll be looking for all of us. We need to run, Helena. If we run, Marek's arrest means nothing. If we finish this, if we destroy that building and those records, then even if they catch us, it will have been worth it. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. How long do you think Marek will last? A day? 2? We have hours, maybe less. This is our only chance. She could see the fear in his young face, the desire to flee warring with something else. Pride, duty, the desperate need to believe that their sacrifices meant something. Finally, he nodded. Tonight, he agreed. But if we're caught, we won't be. Helena lied. She returned to her shift, her hands moving automatically through familiar motions of the loom, while her mind planned. She would need to get to the safe house, retrieve the device, and somehow plant in the Gestapo building, all while the net was closing around them, all while Merrick was being tortured for information that would lead the Germans straight to her. The odds were impossible, but impossible was all they had left. That evening, as the winter sun set early and darkness claimed the city, Helena made her way through the streets with her sewing kit one final time. But now, instead of components, the kit contained tools, wire cutters, a small flashlight, a knife. The device itself was too large to fit in the kit. She would have to carry it differently, more openly, more dangerously. She reached the safe house just after 7. Pan Wojcik let her in, his wrinkled face grave. "They came this morning," he said. "Gestapo. They were asking about Merrick, showing his photograph. They'll be back." "I know. I'm getting the device." "Then you need to leave this place and never come back." The old man nodded. He had known this day would come. They all had. Helena descended into the basement, where the device sat in its hiding place, a collection of wires and explosive material that represented months of risk and sacrifice. It was heavier than she expected, awkward to carry. She wrapped it in a blanket, making it look like a bundle of laundry or supplies. Not perfect, but it would have to do. Zofia and Pyotr were waiting outside, both of them pale but determined. The plan was simple, because it had to be. They would approach the Gestapo building from 3 different directions. Pyotr would create a distraction, a small fire in a trash bin 2 blocks away. Nothing major, but enough to draw the guards' attention. Zofia would watch him across the street, ready to signal if anything went wrong. And Helena would enter through the side door, which intelligence suggested was often left unlocked for officers coming and going at odd hours. Plant the device in the basement near the central support columns. Set the timer for 2 hours and leave. Simple. Suicidal. Their only option. They separated at the corner, each heading to their position. Helena walked alone through the dark streets, the bundle in her arms, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. She thought about her mother, who had died of pneumonia the previous winter. She thought about Tomasz and the poetry he used to write. She thought about all the small, ordinary dreams she had once had. A home, children, a garden where she could grow tomatoes and herbs. All of it gone, burned away by the war, leaving only this. A woman walking toward almost certain death, carrying a bomb wrapped in a blanket. She reached the Gestapo building at 8:30. The street was quiet, the windows of surrounding buildings dark. Most people had learned to stay inside after dark, to avoid drawing attention. She could see the guards at the front entrance, 2 of them stamping their feet against the cold. She circled around to the side, moving through the shadows, and found the door that intelligence had mentioned. It was unlocked. Helena's heart hammered as she slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. She was in a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a single bulb. She could hear voices from somewhere above, the sound of boots on wooden floors. She moved quickly, looking for stairs that would lead down to the basement. Every second felt like an eternity. Every sound made her flinch. She found the stairs behind a door marked Kein Eintritt, no entry. Of course. She descended into darkness, using her small flashlight to navigate. The basement was exactly as described, a maze of storage rooms and mechanical spaces, with thick support columns running floor to ceiling. She chose a spot near the central column, unwrapped the device, and set it carefully on the ground. Her hands shook as she set the timer. 2 hours, 120 minutes. Merrick had shown her how to do this, had made her practice until she could do it in her sleep. But now, in this moment, her mind felt blank with terror. She forced herself to focus, to remember the sequence. Connect the wire here. Turn the dial there. Check the connection. Double check. Done. She stood, leaving the device hidden behind a stack of crates, and turned to leave. That's when she heard the footsteps on the stairs. Someone was coming down. Helena froze, her mind racing. There was nowhere to hide, no other exit. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the beam of a flashlight sweeping down the stairs. She pressed herself against the wall, her hand finding the knife in her pocket. If she was caught now, she would fight. She would not let them take her alive. A figure emerged from the stairwell, a German officer middle-aged, carrying a box of files. He was muttering to himself in German, complaining about having to work late. He walked past her hiding spot without looking in her direction, heading toward a storage room on the far side of the basement. Helena didn't breathe. She didn't move. She became a shadow, a ghost, nothing. The officer deposited his box, turned, and walked back toward the stairs. He passed within 3 feet of her. She could smell his cologne, could see the wedding ring on his finger. He climbed the stairs and disappeared. Helena waited 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, then moved. She ran up the stairs as quietly as she could, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. She reached the hallway, moved toward the side door, and it opened. Another officer was entering, this one younger, more alert. He saw her immediately, his eyes widening in surprise. Was Moxdu here? What are you doing here? Helena didn't think. She couldn't afford to think. She pulled the knife from her pocket and lunged forward, driving the blade toward his throat. But he was faster than she expected, trained for combat. He caught her wrist, twisted, and she felt the knife clatter to the floor. He shoved her against the wall, his hand reaching for his pistol. She brought her knee up hard into his groin. He gasped, his grip loosening, and she shoved him backward. He stumbled, falling, and his head struck the corner of a desk with a sickening crack. He went still. Helena stood over him, breathing hard, her entire body shaking. She didn't know if he was dead or unconscious. She didn't wait to find out. She ran. She burst through the side door into the cold night air and ran through the streets, not caring about protocol or caution anymore. Behind her, she heard shouts, the sound of whistles. They had discovered the unconscious officer. They would search the building. They would find the device. She had to get as far away as possible before it detonated. She ran through alleys and side streets, her lungs burning, her legs threatening to give out. She had no idea where Zofia and Pyotr were, if they had escaped, if they were even alive. She was alone, hunted, with a timer counting down in a building full of Nazis. She found shelter in the ruins of a bombed-out church, collapsing behind a pile of rubble. She checked her watch. 1 hour and 15 minutes had passed. 45 minutes until detonation. If they found the device, if they disarmed it, then everything, Marek's arrest or near capture, all of it, would be for nothing. She waited in the darkness, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. And then, at exactly 10:30, the night exploded. The sound was enormous, a deep concussive boom that shook the ground and rattled what remained of the church's windows. Helena looked up and saw, in the distance, a column of fire rising into sky. Secondary explosions followed. Ammunition or fuel stored in the building, she guessed. The fire grew, spreading, illuminating the night with an orange glow that could be seen across the city. She had done it. They had done it. Helena stayed in the ruins until dawn, too exhausted and too terrified to move. When the sun finally rose, pale and cold, she emerged and made her way carefully back toward her apartment. The streets were chaos. German soldiers and fire crews were everywhere, trying to contain the blaze that had consumed the Gestapo building. She heard fragment of conversation. Dozens dead, records destroyed, a catastrophic failure of security. She kept her head down and kept walking. She never saw Zofia or Pyotr again. She never learned what happened to Marek, though she heard rumors that he had died under interrogation without giving up any names. She never knew if the officer she had fought in the hallway had survived. What she did know was that the building was gone, and with it, the list that would have condemned hundreds of her countrymen to death. She knew that the Germans would retaliate, that innocent people would suffer for what she had done. She knew that the war was far from over, that there would be more operations, more risks, more deaths. But she also knew that she had struck a blow against an enemy that had seemed invincible. She had proven that even the most ordinary person, a factory worker with a sewing kit, could become a weapon. She had shown that resistance was possible, that courage could be found in the most unexpected places. Helena Kowalska continued her work with the resistance until the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, when she was killed during the fighting in the Old Town. She was 25 years old. Her name appears on no monuments. No streets are named after her. But in the secret histories of the resistance, in the stories passed down by those who survived, she is remembered as a woman who walked through Nazi checkpoints carrying death in a sewing kit, who laugh when they laugh at her, and who prove that the quietest voices can sometimes shout the loudest. The war taught many lessons, most of them written in blood and ash. But perhaps the most important was this: never underestimate the person who appears harmless. Never dismiss the quiet strength of those who have lost everything and have nothing left to fear. Because sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the one that makes the loudest noise. Sometimes it's the one hidden in plain sight, carried by steady hands and a heart that refuses to break. Helena's story is one of thousands, tens of thousands, of ordinary people who became extraordinary through necessity and courage. They were teachers and nurses, factory workers and students, mothers and daughters. They carried messages, hid refugees, sabotaged equipment, and yes, planted bombs. They did what needed to be done, knowing that they would likely not survive to see the freedom they were fighting for. And when the Germans laughed at them, at their sewing kits and their quiet demeanors and their apparent helplessness, those ordinary people smiled back, and then they changed the world.